For nearly 10 years, I slept 30 feet from something that every single person around me swore did not exist. Every strange sound I heard, every morning I woke up to find something missing or moved or wrong, every time I looked out my window into those dark woods and felt that something was looking back, they told me it was nothing. They told me the old stories were just that, stories. But I knew. Deep inside the part of me that never fully slept, I knew that whatever was living beyond that tree line was real. And by the time I finally proved it, I understood something that changed every belief I had ever held about fear, about faith, and about what it truly means to be human. Stay with me until the end of this, because by the time I finish telling you what I found, you will never again assume that a monster is what people say it is, and you will understand that the greatest dangers are almost never the ones wearing the most terrifying face. To understand why I stopped laughing at those old stories, I have to take you back to who I was before any of this started. I was 31 years old when I arrived at St. Marguerite's convent. It sat in a valley in rural Pennsylvania, surrounded by old-growth forest that had been standing since before anyone in that region could remember. The stone walls of the convent were thick and cold and beautiful in their own severe way. I had asked to be placed somewhere quiet, somewhere I could be genuinely useful. I had grown up practical. I was the daughter of a schoolteacher and a nurse, raised to believe that if something could not be observed and explained, it probably had not happened the way people were claiming. I was not unkind about it. I simply trusted evidence over imagination. That quality, as it turned out, was the only reason I eventually uncovered the truth. My daily life at St. Marguerite's was simple and full. I taught reading and arithmetic to children from the nearby village of Harlan's Creek every Tuesday and Thursday morning. I helped Sister Dorothea manage the convent's small medical supply room. I kept the garden. I answered letters. I prayed. I was content in a way that I had not expected to be, and I told myself that the quiet of that valley was exactly what my soul had needed. The village of Harlan's Creek had about 400 residents when I arrived. Good people. Hard-working. But they carried something with them that took me a while to name. It was a specific kind of caution. Not fear, exactly. More like an old wound that had healed wrong. Children did not play past the eastern fence line. Parents did not need to explain why. The rule had existed for so long that it had stopped needing a reason. The legend itself was older than anyone living. Every version I heard was slightly different, but the center of it was always the same. Something lived in the ruins of the old Vreeland property, a collapsed manor house about a quarter-mile into the woods beyond our eastern wall. Some said it was a creature born from the grief of a family that had been cursed. Some said it was the spirit of a man who had lost his mind after a great tragedy. Children called it simply the Hollow One, a thing that moved between the trees at night, that could not be seen clearly, that left marks on the ground and took what did not belong to it. Every adult I spoke to dismissed the legend completely. Father Cresswell, our chaplain, rolled his eyes whenever a child brought it up. Sister Dorothea said the story was invented 200 years ago to keep children from wandering into the forest and drowning in the creek. I agreed with her. For a long time, I completely agreed with her. Then the first winter arrived. A farmer named Aldous Brent came to the convent on a gray February morning to report that 3 of his goats had vanished overnight. No tracks, no blood, no signs of predator activity that his neighbors could identify. He was not a dramatic man. He stated the facts plainly and left. I thought little of it. Animals wander, fences fail. But then it happened again in March. 2 chickens from a coop on the northern edge of the village. And then in April, a storage shed behind the convent itself was found with its latch lifted and several pounds of preserved food removed. Carefully removed, not torn or scattered the way an animal would leave things. Placed, as if someone had taken only what they needed and tried not to make a mess. I started writing things down. I had a small journal that I kept in my room, and I began recording dates, locations, descriptions. I said nothing to anyone yet because I had nothing worth saying, but I noticed. I kept noticing, and the noticings kept adding up. The sound came first in June of my second year there. Late at night, a low, rhythmic sound from the direction of the eastern woods, not quite singing, not quite breathing, something in between. I lay in my bed and listened to it for almost an hour before it stopped. I asked Sister Agatha the next morning, casually, whether she had heard anything unusual. She looked at me with something between pity and amusement and told me the wind moved strangely through the ruins of the old Vreeland property. She had heard it her entire life. She patted my hand and changed the subject. But the wind does not take food from a latched shed. By my 4th year, I had filled nearly 2 journals. I had documented 14 separate incidents of missing supplies, 6 accounts from village children of seeing a figure moving in the tree line at dusk, 1 set of large footprints discovered in the mud near the eastern wall that our chaplain personally dismissed as deer tracks, and one moment I have never forgotten when I looked out my bedroom window at 3 in the morning and saw a light moving slowly through the trees. Not a flashlight beam, softer than that, like a lantern being carried with great care by someone who did not want to be seen. I did not sleep the rest of that night. I started visiting the village library. I told people I was researching local history for a lesson I was preparing for the children. That was half true. What I was actually searching for was the Vreeland family. The name appeared on old property records, on a cemetery plaque, on the edges of 2 different historical accounts of the region. The Vreelands had been a wealthy family in the mid-1800s who had built the manor house and largely isolated themselves from the community. The records became vague after 1887, when the property was apparently abandoned following what one document described only as a family crisis of a deeply private nature. That phrase stopped me cold. A family crisis of a deeply private nature. I found a reference in a church archive to a physician named Dr. Harlan Moss, who had visited the Vreeland estate in 1889 and filed a medical report that had been sealed by the county health board. Sealed. In 1889, I wrote 3 letters requesting access. 2 were never answered. The third came back informing me that the records had been transferred and were no longer available at that location. Someone had made sure those records stayed hidden. Then I met Edna. Edna Marsh was 83 years old and lived in a farmhouse at the edge of Harlan's Creek that smelled like dried lavender and old wood. A village girl had mentioned once that Edna's grandmother had worked at the Vreeland estate as a young woman. I visited Edna on a Thursday afternoon bringing bread from the convent kitchen. We talked for 2 hours. She showed me a tin box her mother had left her. Inside was a folded letter written in a careful hand, dated 1901, from a woman named Cecile who had once been a housemaid at the Vreeland property. Cecile's letter described a boy, not a creature. Not a ghost, a boy. Or rather, a man by the time Cecile wrote the letter, though she still called him the boy because she had known him since he was small. His name was Thomas. He was the youngest son of the Vreeland family, born with severe physical deformities that had left his face and hands dramatically different from what people expected. His own family had hidden him inside the estate his entire life, afraid of what the community would say, afraid of legal intervention, afraid of the shame that small and frightened people have always used to justify cruelty. When the rest of the Vreelands died or left, Thomas did not leave with them. He stayed. He had never known anything else. He had learned to survive in those woods, to move quietly, to take only what he needed, to avoid being seen because every time he had been seen in his life, the reaction had been something that had broken pieces of him that never fully healed. Cecile's letter said she had brought him food when she could, that she was the only one who knew he was still there, that she prayed someone kind would find him after she was gone. I sat in Edna's farmhouse and I held that letter and I cried in a way I had not cried in years. Thomas Vreeland was not a monster. He was a man who had been so thoroughly convinced by the world's reaction to him that hiding was safer than being known. He had been alive inside those woods for decades, alone, surviving, leaving careful signs of his need without ever daring to ask for help directly, because he had learned, early and painfully, that asking for help brought only suffering. I went back to the convent and I sat with what I knew for 3 full days. On the 4th day, I walked to the eastern wall, opened the gate, and followed a path through the trees that I had no business knowing except that my 4 years of observation had given me a quiet map of it. I left a basket of food and a blanket near the ruins. I left a note that said simply, "You are not alone. I am not afraid of you. I will come back." The basket was empty the next morning. The note was gone. And on the ground beside where I had left the blanket, pressed carefully into the mud, was a single wildflower, placed deliberately, pointing toward the convent. It took 6 more weeks, but he came to the wall, and I stood on the other side of it, and I talked to him like a person, because that is exactly what he was. Thomas Vreeland died in the winter of my 9th year at St. Marguerite's. He was 67 years old. He had spent nearly his entire life inside a legend that people found easier to fear than to investigate. After his death, I told his story. Not all at once and not to everyone at the same time, but I told it. And I watched something shift in Harlan's Creek, slowly, the way deep things shift. The children stopped calling it the Hollow One. The adults stopped rolling their eyes at the old stories. Because now they knew what the story had actually been about. It had never been about a creature. It had been about a community that chose the comfort of fear over the discomfort of compassion. My faith did not break through any of this. If anything, it deepened into something quieter and more honest, because I understood finally that the truest kind of courage is not the kind that goes looking for danger. It is the kind that keeps walking toward something everyone else has decided is too frightening to touch. The greatest monsters I have ever encountered were not in those woods. They were in the decisions ordinary people made to look away, and the most sacred thing I ever did in my life was refuse to look away with them. I want to ask you something. If you had lived in that village, if you had grown up hearing the legend, if everyone around you, the clergy, the farmers, the elders, had told you it was just a myth, would you have believed them? Or would you have followed your own eyes? Leave your answer in the comments below. I genuinely want to know. And if the ending of this story changed something in the way you saw this mystery, please share it. Because Thomas Vreeland spent 67 years invisible, the least we can do is make sure his story is finally seen.